Alright, welcome back everybody to Mr. Berry Lectures. Here is Chapter 14, Revolution and Nationalism. Section 1, Revolutions in Russia. This one was given originally on April 15th, 2015. Alright, so for main ideas for today's notes is going to be that long-term social unrest in Russia explodes in revolution. This is going to kind of usher in the first communist government the world has ever seen in Soviet Russia. And we'll kind of see during today's notes how several events in history lead to this government change. All right. Now, czars resist change and rule harshly. So before the Soviet Union, before communist Russia, you have basically kings ruling in Russia. These kings are called czars because that's the Russian for king. And they ruled very, very harshly in the 1800s. This causes a lot of unrest. People are not very happy with them. It is not generally a very pleasant place and time to live in the world. Much better, more pleasant places to live in Western Europe and the Americas, etc. Russia was not fun. Now, this is particularly evident, this harsh ruling is particularly evident with Tsars Alexander II, III, and Nicholas II, who are all, of course, family members because the Tsars in Russia are, of course, a dynasty. Now, Alexander II, who actually was reform-minded, he actually wanted to help the people of Russia, just didn't do it fast enough for them, and so he was actually killed by people who wanted faster change. He wanted to make reforms for them, he wasn't making them fast enough, and so they took him out. Unfortunately, this is going to cause further problems for the Russian people because his son, Alexander III, who took over after his father was killed, tried to stomp out revolutionaries. He saw these people who had taken out his father, and he dealt with them. They were not around for very long. And he rules even more strictly than his father had ruled as well. So if life was unpleasant or difficult under Alexander II, it was certainly worse under the third. So they did not accomplish much there that probably they wanted to accomplish. To be clear, under czars, kings in Russia, censorship was very common. If you had written things against the czar, they would come find you. Secret police were monitoring schools, making sure that people were staying in line with, the political theories of the king. Non-Russians living in Russia were generally persecuted or treated very badly. Jews in particular were sent to pogroms, which is basically organized violence against the Jewish people. So we tend to think of violence against the Jews in Europe as sort of a Nazi Germany specific thing, but no, indeed very common in Russia as well, both under the Tsars and in Soviet Russia. To end this one, Alexander III's son, when he passes away or abdicates, Nicholas II took over in 1894 and continues to rule very harshly. So generally, again, not a very fun place to live is Tsarist Russia. Now, during the Tsar's reign in Russia, Russia begins to industrialize. So they begin to industrialize around the 1860s, around 1863 or so. And you'll notice that these dates, 1863 to 1900, the beginnings of a real, true Russian industrialization, is rather behind Europe. We talked about in an earlier chapter, in I think chapter 11 or 10, about industrialization in Europe, and a lot of that takes place in the early to mid 1700s in Britain, for example. Late 1700s for a lot of the rest of Europe, and America, for example, is when you're starting to see industrialization. So we're seeing at least a 50 to 60 year delay in Russia for real industrialization. And so they are lagging behind Europe by a great deal. Now, taxes were raised in Russia during this time to speed this development up. Speed up growth. Well, all of your industrial nations need to have capital, land, and labor. They had land and labor. They needed capital. So to raise that capital, that money, they were raising taxes. And to some extent, that helped it a lot in Russia, but it made lives for people very difficult. Russia during this time had one great outstanding achievement, and that was that they built the world's longest rail line. Specifically, they built the Trans-Siberian Railway, which is over here in this map. You can see the little red line. Thousands and thousands of miles of rail track were laid during this period between 1891 and 1916. So that is very impressive, considering the relative industrialization of Russia at the time. Rapid industrialization during this time brought a lot of discontent to Russians. There were, of course, issues that were predominant and very common in other countries during this time. Low pay was common. Child labor was common in Russia and Europe during industrialization. Bad working conditions, again, common in Europe, common in Russia. Same thing is going on here. So strikes were sometimes called or organized by workers. These generally didn't last very long because, the czars didn't tolerate it. So life was not good during industrialization in Russia, and they were a little behind on it anyway. Now, revolutionary movements are going to kind of grow out of this period in Russia around 1900. You see one particular group of great interest following kind of the industrial period, and they're following the ideas of Karl Marx. We sort of spoke of him during the chapter that we did on industrialization in Western Europe. But Marx basically believed that the working man, or the proletariat, would overthrow the Tsar and rule the country. Proletariat is one of your vocab terms. It is basically, in Marxist theory, the group of workers, and when you see proletariat, you should always think the term workers, the working man, who would overthrow the Tsar and come to rule Russia. That is why in a lot of Soviet propaganda, for example, you will see working people, you will see farmers, you will see factory workers, you will see people with tools in their hands, usually and not uncommonly the hammer and sickle, because those are symbols of the working people or the proletariat. Okay, so a lot of this revolution is going to kind of come out of the proletariat, the working man. One of the leaders of these movements is going to be Vladimir Lenin. The Marxists, by the way, which is the main group of revolutionaries in Russia at the time, are going to split into two groups. The Mensheviks, who are generally more peaceful and less radical, and the Bolsheviks, who are a lot less peaceful and more radical. They're led by a gentleman named Vladimir Lenin, for him, and there are a few crises at home and abroad. Several events between the years of about 1904 and 1917 are going to cause a lot of great unrest, discontent, tension amongst the people of Russia with the Russian Tsar. Okay, a couple of those in specific are going to be the Russo-Japanese War between 1904 and 5, where Russia is crushed by the Japanese, particularly the Japanese Navy, while fighting over Korea and a portion of China called Manchuria. Basically, what happens in this war is it's mostly a naval war, or most of the really important battles are naval battles. And because Japan is an island nation, it happens that they're really, 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 really good at naval strategy, and Russia is not so much. That leads to the Battle of Tsushima, which is basically the last naval battle during that war, wherein it is a heavy, decisive Japanese victory. They basically decimate the Russian Navy, which they will take some time to recover from before World War I. So Japan beats them quite handily. Another event that will cause a bit of problems for the Russian czars during this period, or the Tsar, Nicholas II actually is in control for all of this, but that is the Revolution of 1905, which has gained in Russia the nickname Bloody Sunday, or did at the time gain the nickname of Bloody Sunday. One, obviously, it happened on Wednesday. Sorry, not on Wednesday. Sunday. Workers are asking for better working conditions during this. Basically, some protests that are going on. They want some freedoms, and they want also. They're demanding an elected legislature. They want to elect people to make laws for them. Unfortunately, the Tsar does not want to give them any of these things, really, and he actually has the Russian troops at this protest shoot at them. They are fired upon by Russian soldiers. These workers, as a result of this, of course, riot, and the rioting is so severe that the Tsar is compelled to give them some freedom and some legislative control in the form of a Duma, which basically is a small local Congress. However, because the Tsar does not want to share his power, he takes these freedoms and their legislative control away no more than 10 weeks after this. Now, World War I, it happens, is kind of the final blow, the final nail in the coffin for the Tsars in Russia. Nicholas II had brought Russia into World War I in 1914. Unfortunately, as we kind of saw in our chapter on World War I, Russia is really not prepared for such a large-scale war. They are not industrialized to the same extent that a lot of Western Europe is. Germany, Austria, Hungary, France, Britain. They are generally pretty well prepared for this. Russia is not. They also are not really prepared on a military level. Their military is not as well trained as many of the other armies of Europe, especially Germany. And they were beat often because of this, losing something like 4 million people or soldiers during the First World War. This chart on the right here may or may not be easy to read. I'm not sure during the video, but the Russian Empire loses something like 30% of all casualties during the First World War on the Allied side. So they lose a tremendous number of people, despite not actually being there for the entire war. They still have the largest plurality of deaths during the time of the First World War. Now, the Russo-Japanese War and the First World War, as well as Bloody Sunday, the Revolution of 1905, show the weakness of the Tsar and his military leaders. So people are set now to wrest the government from him. Another interesting side note, however, is the existence and story of Georgy Rasputin, the Russian holy man, as he self-describes himself. Somewhat of a healer, so to speak. He's I guess you would say, sort of a medicine man situation. Her son has this condition called hemophilia, where you bleed out if you're cut, and Rasputin seemed to alleviate some of these sort of symptoms of her son. So she kind of puts him on a pedestal, reveres him, and actually allows him to make some of the governmental decisions while her husband is away directing the war effort. Unfortunately, Rasputin is not a particularly good governmental official. He opposes a lot of reforms, which make a lot of people very angry, and he causes a lot of further unrest in Russia. Some nobles in Russia actually are so unhappy with Rasputin during this period that they actually have him murdered in 1916, and that is a very interesting story because they try to poison him, which does not work. They actually put cyanide in his wine. He drinks the whole bottle or something and survives. They end up having to shoot him and throw him in a lake before he actually dies. So very interesting little story there. And if you have a lot of extra time on your hands, I kind of recommend that you go look that up, because it is fairly interesting. Rasputin is also one of your vocab terms, by the way. He is a self-described holy man who influenced the Tsarina, or queen, basically, of Russia. Now, after all this tension is built up, after all these things have gone on badly for the Tsar, life is, recognizably terrible for the Russian people. In about March of 1917, riots are starting to break out in major industrial cities. They start in Petrograd, which is a major Russian industrial town. Russians start to riot basically over food and fuel shortages, both of which obviously are kind of necessary if you're going to industrialize, or for that matter, live. These local uprisings again become kind of national, and the Tsar is forced to, because of them, step down from his post and leave government. So there are no Tsars now. In their place is put into power a provisional government. These revolutionaries or rioters put in a provisional government which continues to fight World War I. Provisional government is one of your vocab terms, and it is very short. It just means a temporary government. That I am aware of. There is no specific term for this government because they are only around for a few months. Notice here that I have commented they continue to fight World War I. See there. This is going to resources are available at home. Okay, so the provisional government's decision to continue the war is going to really cost it the support of the Russian people. It's one of the things that the Russian people actually really wanted when they got rid of the Tsar, was to get out of World War I, because this provisional government is going to continue fighting it and making their lives worse. That support's going to go really quickly. Now, what are formed instead of the provisional government during this, or well, at the same time as the provisional government, are these things called Soviets. And Soviets are formed to govern local areas and are really frequently more powerful than the provisional government. Soviets, of course, is one of your vocab terms you see up here on the top right. One of the local representative councils formed in Russia after the downfall of the Tsar Nicholas II. One particular revolutionary during this period that is going to come back is Vladimir Lenin. The Germans basically believed that Lenin and his Bolshevik supporters would stir up unrest in Russia and hurt the Russian war effort against Germany. They therefore arranged Lenin's return to Russia after many years of exile. Traveling in a sealed railway boxcar, Lenin reaches Petrograd in about April of 1917. So they're going to see if he can get them out of the war. Now, this is going to spark, of course, another revolution called the Bolshevik Revolution. Why the Bolshevik Revolution? Oh, because that's the group that, if you'll recall, Lenin is the leader of. Okay, so Lenin's Bolsheviks are going to basically gain control of Petrograd, other major Russian industrial cities, and he does this kind of by promising the people bread, land, and peace, or peace, land, and bread, or various other permutations of that. Peace obviously is something the Russian people are looking for. They want to be out of World War I, of course. Bread is a great motivator for a lot of Russian people. Food in general, because there is not a lot of that in Russia. Some people are, of course, in starvation at this point. And land is just a plus. So land is always nice. The provisional government is therefore toppled by the Bolsheviks. They take power in November 1917 during this Bolshevik Revolution, and the Bolshevik government would do basically what the Russian people had wanted from the provisional government, that is, to get them out of the First World War. It's basically one of their first acts as a government. They signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which is a treaty to get them out of World War I against Germany. The only problem with this treaty, however, is it gave up a bunch of land to Germany and Austria-Hungary, and this angers a bunch of Russians and begins a civil war. So a civil war is going to rage in Russia over this period of time after 1917, also preventing them from fighting the First World War. Even if they had wanted to continue it, they couldn't now. Now the Bolsheviks, the Red Army, fought against their opponents, the White Army. Not very creative names, I realize, but that is what they are called in history. Now, the White Army, we should point out, is very disorganized, okay? They were often actually 2 or 3 different armies, some wanting to go back to the Tsar, some wanting different leadership of a communist nature that just wasn't Lenin, and then some that wanted other things as well. So the White Army was disorganized. To this point, the White Army is not able to overcome the Bolsheviks, again the Red Army, and the Red Army won. But during this 3 years of civil war in Russia, something like 14 million people died, which is an amazing number when you consider that the American Civil War probably only netted about 1 million casualties, if that. So a tremendous amount of human life being lost during this civil war in Russia. Now, Lenin is going to try to restore order after the Civil War, after the Revolution and the Civil War. The Russian economy is destroyed, okay? It is in shambles. It is quite terrible, okay? So Lenin